You're listening to Romancing in Paris on Paris Underground Radio.
Hello, and welcome to the Romancing in Paris podcast. I'm your host, Lily Heise. In this podcast, we'll be traveling around the city as I pick out my top romantic spots per arrondissement. You don't have to visit these places only as a couple. Exploring them can be the expression of your own love of Paris. Are you ready to get romancing in Paris? Hello, and welcome back to Romancing in Paris. I hope you've been enjoying this season of the podcast and the various places we visited, from under-the-radar neighborhoods and museums to glitzier famous places. Today's episode actually wonderfully combines these two characteristics. We travel back to the 18th, the district I live in. Situated in the center north of the city, this rather large district is particularly known for the charming former village of Montmartre. While there are many fantastic places in other parts of the 18th, Montmartre just has such a great concentration of romantic charm that it's drawn me back again for today's episode, and to a place I frequently walk down. Grab your chérie, we're going to the Avenue Junot. Millions of visitors flock to Montmartre every year, lured in by its postcard-perfect streets, sweeping views over the city, artsy flair that is found in Place du Tertre, and of course the iconic Sacré-Cœur Basilica. However, very few of these droves drift further beyond Rue Norvin, where the tourist shops are, and some amble down Rue des Saules to see La Maison Rose, or down Rue de l'Arbovoir to Place Davida. And only a little bit further, where a small percentage of Montmartre strollers go, is the lovely Avenue Junot. Now, this rather wide avenue, in comparison to Montmartre's mostly tiny streets, wasn't always so attractive. In fact, the land around here used to have a shanty town. Yes, a shanty town in Paris. Hard to imagine these days, isn't it? You see, when Baron Haussmann was creating elegant Paris in the mid-19th century, bulldozing working-class areas that once existed on Ile de la Cité or near the Louvre, some of the poorest of these delocalized residents ended up in Montmartre's shantytown, called Le Maquis, meaning scrubland in French. Le Maquis spread over the territory between Rue Le Pic to Rue Caulaincourt, so the west side of the Montmartre hill, to the right of now standing Sacré-Cœur. The large shantytown was comprised of makeshift houses made of wood and repurposed materials. It was lived in by rag pickers, laundresses, a few eccentric artists, other bohemian types, and criminals looking for a good place to hide out. Ooh, yikes. Parts of it actually existed into the 1940s, but most of it was demolished from 1910 to 12 in order to build Avenue Junot. In the early days of the 20th century, the flatter areas of Paris in the west of the city were being filled in with apartment buildings and houses, like we discussed in the last episode of the podcast. Developers were forced towards less desirable areas, ones which were harder to build on, like the various hilly areas in the north and northeast of the city, such as Montmartre and La Butte-Bougère covered in episode 19, or other areas with less stable land, like down in the 13th Quartier des Peupliers discussed just a few episodes ago. It was such that the shantytown dwellers were evicted to make way for this new avenue. And not just any avenue. The curvaceous street is lined with some gorgeous and very unique houses. The lower part, close to Rue Caulaincourt, was developed first, and thus it has some Haussmannian-style buildings that were still in style in around 1910-12. But in the mid and top section, one can find some beautiful Art Deco buildings, rather a rarity in Paris, especially when it comes to houses. And guess what? I even found some with romantic stories. How perfect for this episode. I'd suggest we take a little audio stroll together down the street. We won't be talking about each building, but a selection to visit which are the most interesting and romantic. Since we're all the way up here at the top of the street, where it begins at Rue Girardon, I suggest we dip down just a little and have a look at the Moulin Radé, the windmill of the Moulin de la Galette. It helps set the backdrop of the once countryside and agricultural lands which surrounded Montmartre. The Moulin de la Galette was turned into a dance hall in the second half of the 1800s, which became popular with the area's residents, including those of the Maquis, and was immortalized by Renoir in his painting Le Bal du Moulin de la Galette, hanging at the Musée d'Orsay. Walking a few paces over to Avenue Junot, at the corner of Girardon and the beginning of Avenue Junot, there is a small theatre, Le Théâtre Le Pic. Opened in 1954, it was purchased in 1983 by Oscar Award-winning French filmmaker Claude Lelouch. He redecorated it in a 1920s style to be used as a set for his film Edith et Marcel, about the relationship between Edith Piaf and her lover boxer Marcel Cerdan. The famous songstress comes up again on this street a little later on, but connected to a different lover. Back in the Claude Lelouch days, the theatre was called Le Ciné 13, or Cinema 13, which was its name when I moved to the neighborhood. I was always confused. Was it a cinema or a theatre? I have to say, I've never been. However, since 2018, the theatre has been run by the film director's daughter, Salomé Lelouch, who decided to change its name to Le Théâtre Le Pic. There is a nice sculpted niche to the right of the entrance that you might want to eye up for a photograph. Across the street is a really charming older building that is evocative of the old village of Montmartre. Just past this is an entrance into the little park, Le Square Suzanne Buisson. You could slip inside if you like. It has a statue of Saint-Denis, Saint Denis, who has links to Montmartre, and a pétanque pitch, French bocce ball, which often has people playing rounds in the afternoon, which adds some French charm. Otherwise, the park isn't necessarily particularly romantic, so you can also skip it. If you do go into the park, from the balustrade along Avenue Junot, look across the street, up through the buildings, and you can catch sight of the back of Montmartre's other windmill within the Moulin de la Galette complex. It's called Le Blute Fine. On a good day, depending on the leaves of the trees, you can also spot it down on the street level too. Afterwards, cross over to the other side of Avenue Junot, and on the left side there is a staircase which leads up to Le Hameau des Artistes. Now, this is a private street enclosed by a gate. You might be in luck if it's ever open. You could pop in to have a look. I was fortunate enough one day to be shown around inside. It's a secret complex of Art Deco villas and art studios. Absolutely charming. Just past this, at number 13, is the former home of French illustrator Francisque Bilbao. Not as well known as some other Montmartre artists like Vincent van Gogh or Auguste Renoir, Bilbao was very attached to Montmartre. He was a founder of the Republic of Montmartre, an association that helps preserve the historic character of the neighborhood and which still exists today. He also had his own association, which assisted the underprivileged children of the area, like those living in the remains of the Maquis. After his death in 1946, the mosaics of children in a similar style to his art were added near the top of the facade of the building. Before moving on, look over to the next house, which is a modernist construction designed by Austrian architect Adolf Loos for the Hungarian Dadaist poet Tristan Tzara. It's a national classified building. But from here, I want you to turn around and look across Avenue Junot. Here you can admire a line of Art Deco townhouses and apartment buildings, which look rather out of place in Paris, filled with so many limestone Haussmannian-style buildings. These ones are so pretty, especially in spring when the one at number 18 is draped in purple wisteria blossoms. Just after Tristan Tzara's house, there is a gate. This gives access to the Hôtel Particulier de Montmartre, a boutique hotel in a former manor house, which has a beautiful garden cafe and a chic restaurant and bar. This could be a nice place for a break. Well, we haven't journeyed too far yet, but if you'd been wandering around Montmartre previously, you might need a break, or you can come back here after. A tiny bit further is the modern cafe Marcel, another good break spot. On the other side of Marcel is the Villa Léandre, a super charming cul-de-sac lane lined with cottage-like houses. Take a wander down. It could be the ideal spot to steal a kiss. I won't talk too much about this street, which was developed mainly in the 1920s, like the Art Deco buildings on Avenue Junot, because we might revisit it in more detail in a future episode. If you're enjoying this episode of Romancing in Paris, you may also like to listen in to our sister podcast, Navigating the French, which explores the origins and cultural significance of a word in the French language. Romancing in Paris will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Romancing in Paris. Back going down Avenue Junot, a little further, and still on the same side of the street, you will notice a picturesque staircase, which has a nice view down onto the classic Café Le Cépage. The building, right there on the right of the stairs at number 39, used to be a hotel called the Alcina. Edith Piaf rented a room here where she would meet up with her lover and fellow iconic French singer Yves Montand. Oh la la, Edith. Cue La Vie en Rose. Or perhaps more suited, Je ne regrette rien. I don't regret anything. From here, you can admire the building across Avenue Junot. Hidden within the greenery and on the corner of the side street Rue Simon d'Erreur is the mansion and art studio built for sculptor Louis-Aimé Lejeune and designed by architect Adolphe Thiers in 1927. It's also a classified building. Across from it, you might notice more white Art Deco townhouses. Next to Louis Le Jeune's former mansion is a relatively large Art Deco apartment building, also designed by Thiers, and also a classified building. Among its history of residence is Françoise Gillot. That name might ring a bell, as she was one of the partners of Pablo Picasso. They were in a relationship together from 1944 to 1953, in which she had 2 children by Picasso, Claude and Paloma. An artist like Picasso, Françoise also took up the pen and has written several books, including a biography about her relationship with the not always best partner called Life with Picasso. At 101, she's still alive today, and I've been told still lives in the building. So you never know. If you see a little old lady walking up Avenue Junot, it might be her. The last building of note is number 47, where the poet and songwriter Jacques Prévert lived with his companion Janine Tricotet. Prévert wrote songs for various legendary French singers, including Juliette Greco and, drumroll, Yves Montand. I wonder if Yves ever stopped by to see Prévert after or before visiting Edith. If only the walls of the Hotel Alsina could talk. On that romantic note, we'll wrap up our stroll of the Avenue Junot at its end, the pretty square Joël Latac, where you could take a little lover's break on one of its benches. Inside the park area is also a statue depicting romantic lovers. Across from the square is another nice cafe, Chez Ginette. Or you can decide to go back up to the Hotel Particulier or Marcel. Alternatively, if you'd like to keep on walking, go up the stairs to the right of the park. And just there on the right is the Allée des Bouillards, which we visited in the first episode on the 18th. Thank you for listening to this episode of Romancing in Paris. Check out our social media for some photos of Avenue Junot and some of the hidden amours des artistes. If you have a minute, please rate or review it. It only takes a moment and it's extremely helpful in attracting new listeners. You can find more great ideas for romantic things to do in Paris and around the world on my website jetammeneither.com, and check out the wonderful range of other podcasts on the Paris Underground Network. Until next time, happy romancing in Paris.
This episode of Romancing in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.